I thought I had seen everything life could offer, until one quiet evening with my grandson opened a door I never expected. Let me tell you about the night everything changed. But first, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where my stories are being heard. Now, settle in close. This one starts out simple and ends somewhere I never imagined. I always look forward to my grandson Dylan's visits. At 32, he's grown into a kind, gentle soul who still calls me Nana, like he did when he was 5. It makes my heart feel full in a way few things do anymore. He calls more than most grandsons his age, and when he shows up with that soft smile of his, I can feel time fall away. I forget I'm 78. I forget the aches in my knees and the loneliness that creeps in when the house is too quiet for too long. It was a Friday evening when Dylan asked if he could stay over. His apartment was being fumigated or cleaned or something. He explained it, but truth be told, I was just happy he'd be under my roof for the night. I offered to make spaghetti with garlic bread, his favorite since he was a teenager. We laughed over dinner, talked about nothing and everything. Politics, memories, old neighbors who had moved away. The kind of conversation that doesn't need structure. Just two people who care about each other, letting the night stretch slowly around them. After dinner, we settled in the living room. The old recliner had a blanket tossed over the back like always, and Dylan helped me tidy the table while still sneaking a breadstick. I caught him in the act and gave him a playful swat on the arm. He grinned like a boy. It's strange how some smiles stay the same, no matter how the person grows. You sure I'm not putting you out by staying the night, Nana? He asked as he plopped down onto the couch. Oh, please, I said, waving my hand. I used to tuck you in every night. I think I can manage one more. He laughed, then asked if I wanted to watch something. We settled on an old black and white film. To Kill a Mockingbird, I think it was. Halfway through, the lights dimmed outside as a storm rolled in, and I could feel the house hunker down the way old homes do. Dylan fetched us both tea, his with honey, mine plain, and we curled up under separate blankets. There was something so peaceful about it. A kind of quiet that only comes when you know someone's presence is not just welcome, but needed. As the credits rolled, he turned to me and said, "You know, Nana, I always felt safest here." That hit me harder than I expected. I smiled, but my chest ached a little. Not from pain, but from something deeper. Pride, maybe, or love, or the realization that time slips by so quickly. I'm glad, I said softly. This old place remembers your footsteps better than anyone else's. We stayed up talking longer than I expected. Midnight passed, and the wind rattled the windows like fingers brushing against the glass. I was about to suggest we both get some sleep when he looked at me, really looked. His expression shifted just slightly. Thoughtful, maybe even vulnerable. I don't talk to anyone the way I talk to you, he said. That line hung in the air. Like steam over a teacup, it floated there between us. I could see something stirring in his eyes, something he wanted to say, but hadn't yet found the courage to speak aloud. I leaned forward, setting my teacup down carefully. I'm listening, sweetheart, I said. Whatever it is. He hesitated, then looked away. I thought he might say something about a woman, or about a dream he hadn't pursued. Maybe even his father, my son, who he'd always had a complicated relationship with. But instead, he surprised me. I don't know if you've noticed, he began slowly, but I haven't been doing too well lately. Emotionally, I mean. I've just been off. My heart ached. Oh, Dylan, no, I don't mean to worry you. I'm not in danger or anything. I just feel like the world has moved ahead without me. like I'm living on autopilot. I reached out, placing my hand over his. His skin was warm, firm. That same little scar on his knuckle from when he tried to open a can of peaches at age 11. You're not alone in that, I told him. I think a lot of us feel that way, especially after these past few years. He nodded, swallowing hard. His hand turned over and held mine gently. His thumb moved across my palm like he was grounding himself in the moment. You always make things feel steady, real. The room felt smaller suddenly. Not in a suffocating way, but in the way a quilt feels when you pull it tight around you in the cold. Safe, close. Neither of us moved for a moment. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the kind you earn. I could sense he needed this, whatever this was. A night of presence, of comfort, of closeness that didn't demand anything, didn't ask questions. Would it be weird, he said after a long pause, if I slept in here with you tonight? I blinked, not out of shock, but because something about the question tugged at memories from decades ago. Nights when he was little, scared after a bad dream, and I'd let him crawl into bed beside me without hesitation. No, I said, not weird at all. I patted the recliner, then rose slowly. He stood too, unfolding a second blanket, laying it over the couch. I grabbed a pillow from the hall closet, handed it to him, and we said good night. But as I turned to go, I felt his hand brush my arm. Nana, he said softly, thanks for tonight. Something in his voice made me stop. I turned back, looked into his eyes. Eyes I'd seen cry, laugh, grow older, and I knew this night was more than just a sleepover. It was a turning point for both of us. I smiled, touched his cheek gently, and whispered, always, sweetheart. Then I turned off the lamp. The room went dark, but neither of us felt alone. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from discomfort. My old bed still suits me just fine, but from thoughts that stirred gently beneath the surface like ripples on still water. I lay there listening to the soft rhythm of rain tapping the windows, and every so often I could hear Dylan shift on the couch. It reminded me of when he was a boy, and I used to check on him through the crack in the nursery door, just to make sure he was still breathing. It's strange, isn't it? How even when they're grown, that worry never leaves you. Not really. Around 6 a.m., I rose quietly. My knees weren't thrilled about it, but I've learned to ignore their protests. The house was hushed, soaked in that early blue light that comes just before sunrise. I tiptoed through the hallway and paused by the living room entrance. There he was curled up under my crocheted afghan, his long legs dangling off the end like they always have. One arm hung over his chest, and his face was turned slightly toward the ceiling, peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I stood there longer than I meant to. There was something sacred in that moment. The stillness, the safety. For a fleeting second, I wished time would stop right there. That the outside world would leave us be, frozen in that hush of morning where nothing was broken and no one was hurting. Eventually, I turned toward the kitchen and began clanking around gently. Made coffee the old-fashioned way, boiling water, stirring in the grounds by hand. Dylan always said I make it better than any machine. Maybe it's just the love I pour into it. He woke up not long after. I heard the creak of the couch springs and his footsteps padding across the hardwood. "Morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. I turned and smiled. His hair was a mess, sticking up in all directions, and he looked more like 16 than 32. "Coffee's ready," I said, handing him a mug. "Careful. It's hot." He took it with both hands like it was something precious. We didn't speak much for the first few minutes, just sipped side by side at the kitchen table, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. "I feel different this morning." I looked over. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring down into his cup, watching the steam curl upward like thoughts he couldn't quite catch. "Different how?" I asked softly. "I don't know. Lighter. Like something shifted. Being here last night. It helped. A lot." I reached out and placed my hand on his forearm. His skin was warm. Solid. "You're allowed to need people, Dylan. Even now. Especially now." His eyes finally met mine, and I could see it, there just behind the calm, the storm he'd been carrying alone. The weight of years of expectations of trying to be strong when maybe he didn't want to be anymore. "I don't think I've let myself slow down in years," he said. "Always pushing, always performing. But last night, sitting with you, it reminded me of something I've missed. That feeling of being seen." My heart clenched at that, not from sadness, but from recognition. I knew that feeling well. I had lived many years after my husband passed, in the quiet, in the invisible. But Dylan had noticed me last night, and I had truly seen him, too. "Sometimes," I said, "we don't realize how much we're holding in until someone sits beside us and asks nothing." He nodded, then surprised me by reaching across the table and holding my hand, just like that, fingers lacing with mine. "I wish I could stay longer," he said. "But I've got to head to the office later. Meeting at noon." "Of course," I said, squeezing his hand. "You've got your life. But I don't want this to be just a one-time thing. Can I come back next weekend? Just to be here again?" The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't want him to. I did more than he knew, but because something in his tone had changed. There was a softness in it, a reverence. "Of course you can," I said. "This house will always be home to you." He smiled, and it was different than the one he gave when teasing or joking. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they feel safe, when they feel found. He left just before 9, kissed me on the cheek, hugged me longer than usual, and said, "Thank you for seeing me." After he left, I wandered the living room, folded his blanket, smoothed the couch cushions, picked up his empty mug from the coffee table. But I didn't feel alone. That evening, I found myself looking at old photo albums. There was one of him at 9, dressed in a Superman cape, grinning toothlessly at the camera. Another of us sitting on the porch swing, his tiny hand resting in mine. And now here we were, decades later, and the hand was bigger, stronger, but the need for comfort hadn't changed, and neither had the way I felt when he looked at me with trust in his eyes. It was just a sleepover, I kept thinking. But somehow, it wasn't. It had cracked something open, in him, in me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like life still had a few quiet surprises left. Even at 78. Even in the simplest moments. Even when it's just a grandson sleeping on a couch. And I couldn't help but wonder what might happen next time. The following days passed with a strange sort of glow around them. Everything felt a little softer. I moved through my routines, watering the plants, folding laundry, setting the dinner table for one, but with Dylan's voice echoing in small corners of my mind. He had said things I hadn't expected, things that had stirred something in me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just existing through the week. I was waiting. Not impatiently, just curiously, like I was walking through a chapter that hadn't ended yet. Friday came, and so did the sound of his car pulling into the driveway around 6 p.m. I'd already set the table, and the roast chicken was resting beneath foil on the counter. I heard the front door creak open before he called out, "Nana." "In here," I said, turning toward the kitchen archway. When he walked in, he looked different. Not dramatically, but softer around the eyes. There was no mask of business, no weight from the outside world pressing down on him like before. Just Dylan. My Dylan. "Smells amazing," he said, setting a small overnight bag down near the door. I smiled. "You know I cook better when someone's coming." Dinner was easy, light-hearted. We laughed more. He told me about a coworker who'd accidentally sent a cat video to the company email chain, and I nearly choked on my wine. But underneath the laughter, there was an undercurrent, a quiet knowing, the kind of comfort that only grows when two people share something sacred, even if unspoken. After the plates were cleared and the dishes rinsed, we found ourselves once again in the living room. This time, he didn't bother asking what we should watch. He simply brought out the old wooden box from the bookshelf, where I keep decks of cards, a few board games, and that old black and white domino set from when he was a child. "I've been thinking about these all week," he said, opening the box. "You used to cry when you lost," I teased. He laughed. "Still do, if we're being honest." We played until the room was dim and only the lamp by the recliner lit our faces. The pieces clinked gently as we moved them across the table. No rush, just the slow rhythm of being near someone who knows your history without needing to retell it. After our 5th round, Dylan leaned back with a sigh. "I haven't felt this present in a long time." I nodded. "There's something healing about letting yourself pause." He studied me then, not just my words, but my face, my hands, as if he were noticing every line, every movement. And maybe he was. "You know," he said slowly, "last week stayed with me. I kept thinking about it, about how it felt to just be with you. No pressure, no pretending." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Me too." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "There's something I didn't say before, something I wasn't sure how to say." I felt my breath catch, but I didn't move. I let him speak. "When I was younger," he began, "this house was my escape. I'd walk here after school when Mom and Dad were fighting. I never told you because I didn't want you to worry. But I'd come here and you'd hand me a cookie or tell me about a dream you had, or just let me sit in silence." My chest tightened, not with regret, but with the weight of something precious being unearthed. "You never asked me what was wrong," he continued. "You just let me be. And that was everything." I reached across the little coffee table, ignoring the dominoes, and placed my hand over his. "I always knew, Dylan. Not the details, but I knew. And I wanted you to have a place where the world couldn't touch you." His fingers turned beneath mine, lacing them together, just like last time. But this time, his hand didn't tremble. "I think I've been carrying so much for so long," he said, voice low. "And the strange thing is, last week, just sitting with you, talking, sleeping in the same room, it made me realize how empty I felt. The quiet that followed was deep, the kind that shifts something between two people." Then, softly, he asked, "Would it be okay if I stayed in your room tonight? Just like when I was little?" I hesitated, not out of fear, but out of the sheer intimacy of the question. Not inappropriate. Just raw. Vulnerable. This was not a man seeking escape. This was someone searching for something deeper. Something he'd lost somewhere in the years between childhood and adulthood. I nodded slowly. Yes, Dylan, you can. I rose first. He followed. Neither of us spoke as we stepped into the bedroom. I pulled back the covers on the right side, his side now, I supposed, and he stepped out of his jeans, folding them neatly before slipping under the blanket in his undershirt and boxers. I moved around to my side. My cotton nightgown swished softly as I climbed in, the familiar coolness of the sheets wrapping around my legs. For a moment, we lay there in silence, shoulder to shoulder, breath to breath. Then he whispered, "Can I?" I knew what he was asking before he finished. I opened my arms. He shifted toward me, head resting gently against my shoulder, one arm draped across my middle. Like a child. Like a man returning to something safe. I held him, quietly, tenderly, not as a child, not as a man, but simply as someone I loved. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit, not even to myself. I needed this too. Not just him. Me. We stayed like that for a long time. His breathing slowed against my shoulder, warm and steady, and I could feel the weight he had been carrying begin to soften. My hand rested gently on his arm, fingertips tracing slow, calming circles, something I used to do when he was a boy with growing pains, crying quietly into his pillow because he didn't want to seem weak. But this was different. He wasn't a boy anymore, and I wasn't just a grandmother offering comfort. There was something unspoken between us now, a deep, respectful closeness that existed outside of words, a kind of healing you don't plan for. It simply unfolds when two souls finally stop pretending they're fine. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many moments like this I'd missed, because I assumed people didn't need them anymore. We live in a world where being strong means being silent, where emotions are rushed aside. But here in the quiet of my room, with Dylan resting beside me, I realized that sometimes what we need most is to just be held. No questions, no fixes, just held. Eventually, he spoke again, barely a whisper. "I'm scared, Nana." My heart tensed. Of what, sweetheart? He hesitated. Of getting older. Of ending up alone. Of never being truly understood. I turned slightly, cradling his head against my chest the way I used to when he was small. My voice stayed low, steady. "You're not alone. You never will be. And as for being understood, sometimes we have to allow ourselves to be seen before we can be known." He nodded against me. "You've always seen me." There was a pause, then he added, "I don't even know if I deserve that." "You do," I said without hesitation. "You always have." He grew quiet again, his hand resting softly on my side, and I could feel the tension gradually draining from his frame. There was a peacefulness in his stillness, the kind that comes only when someone has finally let down their guard. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Time didn't matter. The storm from the week before had passed, but it was the storm inside him that had finally calmed. At some point during the night, I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, morning had arrived again, soft golden light spilling through the curtains, the sound of birds outside, and Dylan still beside me, eyes closed, breathing slow and deep. I watched him for a moment. His face was relaxed. He looked younger somehow, or maybe not younger, but lighter. And in that moment, I understood something that brought both peace and a little ache to my heart. No matter how old we grow, no matter how strong we appear, we never stop needing to feel safe, to feel close, to feel known. Eventually, he stirred, blinking against the sunlight. "Good morning," I whispered. He smiled sleepily. "Best sleep I've had in years." We got up together, dressed, and made breakfast: eggs, toast, and a little peach jam I'd been saving. We ate in the kitchen with the window open, and he talked about work, about the books he'd been reading, about the idea of therapy and how he might finally try it. He was different. Still Dylan, but a little more whole. After breakfast, he helped me clean up and packed his things slowly, like he wasn't quite ready to leave. I walked him out to his car, and just before he got in, he turned and hugged me. Really hugged me. Not just a goodbye hug, but a thank you. A promise. "I don't want this to be the last time," he said. "It won't be," I answered. "This door is always open." He nodded. Then more softly, "You're more than my Nana." I smiled at that. "And you're more than my grandson." We didn't need to explain what we meant. It was enough that we felt it. He drove away, and I stood on the porch, the morning air cool against my skin, watching until his car disappeared around the bend. That night, I sat in the same recliner with a cup of tea, the blanket folded neatly across my lap. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt content, like something important had happened here, something that didn't need labels or explanations, something healing. Later, when I went to bed, I pulled back the covers and found that he'd left something on the pillow. A small note written in his familiar handwriting. "You helped me remember who I am. Thank you for giving me space to be me. I love you." I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, holding that note, letting it wash over me, and I realized something beautiful. It had started as just a sleepover, but what it became was something far deeper, a reunion of hearts, a rediscovery of connection